The world is in shock. Gene Hackman, the Hollywood titan, the man who shaped cinema with his raw intensity, is gone. But one person isn't staying silent. Clint Eastwood has spoken. And when Eastwood speaks, it's not just words. It's a message, a declaration, a revelation. This isn't just about mourning a loss. This is about history. About an era that's slipping through our fingers, one legend at a time. Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman weren't just actors. They were institutions. Their careers didn't just run parallel, they were intertwined. Two forces of nature that reshaped Hollywood with every role they took on. They defined what it meant to be a leading man in a time when cinema was undergoing a revolution. The polished, picture-perfect heroes of old were being replaced with something raw, grittier, something real. And these two men weren't just part of that change. They were leading it. Eastwood, with his razor-sharp presence and that iconic piercing squint, became the very image of the lone, unshakable outlaw. He didn't need long-winded monologues to captivate an audience. He spoke with his silence, his presence. Every movement, every glare told a story. Hackman, on the other hand, was a master of transformation. He could be the relentless force of justice, the broken man, the power-hungry villain, all in one lifetime. He wasn't just acting. He was living inside every character he played. Their rise to the top wasn't handed to them. They clawed their way up, through rejection, through years of being overlooked, through the brutal reality of an industry that wasn't designed for men like them. They weren't born into fame. They weren't polished Hollywood elites. They were fighters, molded by hardship, driven by a hunger to be more than just another face on a screen. Eastwood served in the Army, Hackman in the Marine Corps. Two different paths, but one shared foundation: discipline, resilience, survival. They didn't just act like tough men on screen, they lived it. Hollywood in the late 60s and 70s was a battlefield. The old ways were crumbling, and a new kind of cinema was emerging, one that didn't shy away from violence, from darkness, from the unsettling truths of the human condition. Eastwood and Hackman didn't just thrive in that era, they defined it. They weren't interested in playing perfect heroes. They played men, flawed, unpredictable, sometimes brutal, and audiences felt it. They didn't play into the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. They weren't the kind to bask in the spotlight of red carpets or smile for flashing cameras just for the sake of it. They had a different kind of bond, one built on respect, on a shared understanding of what it took to stay at the top. There was no need for grand displays of friendship. They understood each other without words, without spectacle. That was their way. But despite their deep mutual respect, they were also measuring sticks for one another. They weren't just actors working in the same industry. They were forces constantly pushing each other forward. When Eastwood delivered a cinematic masterpiece, Hackman answered back with an unforgettable performance of his own. When Hackman dominated the screen with sheer presence, Eastwood made sure his next move was even stronger. It wasn't rivalry in the traditional sense. It was survival in an industry that demanded excellence at every turn. And then came Unforgiven, the moment where everything they had built, every path they had walked, finally collided in a way that changed film forever. By 1992, both men had nothing left to prove. They had conquered Hollywood. They had won the respect of their peers, the admiration of audiences, and the envy of those who could never match their impact. But then Clint Eastwood set his sights on something bigger. He wasn't just making another Western. He was dismantling the myth that had defined the genre for decades. He was ending it. Eastwood had one man in mind for the role of Little Bill Daggett: Gene Hackman. There was no backup plan, no second choice. Hackman was the man for the job, but Hackman hesitated. He wasn't sure about it. The film was brutal. It wasn't just about gunfights and showdowns. It was about the cost of violence, about the way it twists and corrodes a man from the inside out. But Eastwood saw it differently. This wasn't a film about glory. It was about consequences. It was about men who had spent their lives in bloodshed and couldn't outrun what they had become. Hackman understood. He accepted. And together, they made history. On set, there was no need for over-explaining, no need for endless discussions. They knew what needed to be done. They had walked this road their entire careers. Every scene between them crackled with tension, not because they were acting, but because they understood these characters, these men who were past their prime, trying to hold on to what little power they had left. Eastwood's William Money was a man haunted by his past, trying to escape it. Hackman's Little Bill was a sheriff so consumed by his own sense of justice that he had become indistinguishable from the outlaws he hunted. There were no simple heroes and villains in Unforgiven. There were just men trying to survive their own choices. And Hackman's performance? Terrifying. He didn't just play a villain. He played a man who truly believed he was doing what was right, even as his methods became crueler and crueler. He was so good in the role that audiences hated him, but they couldn't look away. That was the power of Gene Hackman. He made you feel everything, and Eastwood knew it. He had always respected Hackman, but on this set, watching him bring Little Bill to life, he saw something even greater. He saw the truth of why Hackman had lasted so long in Hollywood. The film was a masterpiece, a brutal, unflinching examination of what violence does to a man. It wasn't just another Western. It was the Western that changed everything. And when the Academy Awards rolled around, Hackman took home an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. It was a moment of triumph, not just for Hackman, but for an entire era of cinema that he and Eastwood had defined. But after Unforgiven, something changed. Hackman walked away. No grand farewell, no drawn-out exit, just silence. He had done it all. He had played every kind of role imaginable, won every major award, and left behind a legacy most actors could only dream of. He had nothing left to prove. And so, in 2004, he stepped away from Hollywood. No dramatic announcement, no final send-off. He simply disappeared from the industry he had dominated for so long. And Clint Eastwood? He kept going, because stopping wasn't in his nature. Directing became his true passion, and as long as he had a story to tell, he wasn't about to slow down. But even though they had taken different paths, one question always remained. What if? What if they had done one more film together? What if there had been one last showdown? Now, that question will never be answered, because Gene Hackman is gone. And for Clint Eastwood, this isn't just about losing a friend. It's about watching the world they built slowly vanish, piece by piece. Hollywood isn't what it used to be. The old ways are dying. The legends who shaped the industry are fading into history. And with Hackman's passing, another chapter has closed. But this story isn't over. Not yet, because there's still one thing left to be said. Hollywood moves forward, as it always does. The machine never stops. But something is missing. With every passing year, with every legend who fades away, the industry feels a little less like what it once was. The raw, uncompromising energy that men like Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman brought to the screen? It's becoming a relic of the past, and Clint Eastwood knows it. Gene Hackman wasn't just another actor to him. He was a reminder of a time when the industry was built on talent, not spectacle. When actors didn't rely on CGI, franchises, or social media stardom to make their mark. When their performances spoke louder than any marketing campaign. They came from a different world, a world where you had to earn your place, where there was no safety net. You either proved yourself or you disappeared. And Hackman? He proved himself. Again and again. Even though their careers took different routes, they were always orbiting the same universe. Eastwood had his westerns, his brooding, violent loners, his stoic gunslingers who could silence a room with a single look. Hackman took a different road, one paved with layered, deeply flawed characters who lived in shades of gray. He played lawmen who weren't always noble, criminals who weren't always heartless, and men on the edge of losing everything. They were both drawn to stories about power, morality, survival. And that's why their collision in Unforgiven was inevitable. For Eastwood, Unforgiven was personal. It wasn't just another movie, it was the final word on the westerns that had made him famous. It was the last time he would pick up a gun as the outlaw, the last time he would wear that persona. It was his farewell to the archetype that had defined him. And for Hackman, it was something different. It was a testament to what he had always done best, blurring the lines between good and evil, between right and wrong. He played Sheriff Little Bill Daggett not as a caricature, not as a one-dimensional villain, but as a man who truly believed in his own righteousness. That was what made him so terrifying. He wasn't out for chaos. He genuinely thought he was saving his town, but his obsession with control, his unrelenting sense of order, made him just as dangerous as the killers he claimed to despise. The tension between him and Eastwood on screen? It was electric. Every scene crackled with the weight of decades of experience, decades of understanding what made a character real. And yet, despite the respect they had for each other, despite the cinematic history they created together, their paths never crossed again after Unforgiven. Gene Hackman walked away, while other actors clung desperately to relevance, signing on to mediocre films just to stay in the spotlight. Hackman refused. He had done it all. He had nothing left to prove. He had spent his life giving everything to his craft, and when he decided it was time, he left. No grand send-off, no endless parade of final roles. He simply disappeared. But Eastwood? He kept going, because he couldn't stop, because stopping meant acknowledging the inevitable. And Clint Eastwood has never been the kind of man to accept fate without a fight. For years, people speculated. Would Hackman return for one last film? Would he step in front of the camera just once more, just to give fans that final moment of closure? Directors tried, offers came in, but Hackman never looked back. His last film, Welcome to Mooseport, in 2004, wasn't the grand farewell people had imagined for him. It wasn't an Oscar-winning masterpiece. It was a light-hearted comedy. And then, just like that, he was gone. But Eastwood kept making films, kept defying expectations, pushing forward long after most of his contemporaries had faded away. He directed, he acted, he told the stories that mattered to him, refusing to let time slow him down. Yet, no matter how much he accomplished, no matter how many awards he won or films he made, he always spoke about Unforgiven with a kind of reverence, because that film, more than anything else, symbolized something deeper. It was the last time he and Hackman stood side by side. The last time two giants of cinema clashed in a way that felt real. And now, that chapter is truly closed. With Hackman's passing, another piece of Hollywood's soul has been lost. Eastwood isn't the sentimental type. He doesn't waste time with long-winded eulogies or public displays of grief. But those who know him, those who have worked with him, saw the shift in his demeanor when the news broke. Because this isn't just about losing a friend. It's about losing an era. They were the last of a dying breed. The men who built Hollywood through sheer force of will. The ones who didn't rely on gimmicks or trends to stay relevant. The ones who let their work speak for itself. And now, that world, the one they helped shape, is slipping away. It's being replaced by something else, something shinier, something faster, something built on spectacle over substance. And Clint Eastwood is left standing, watching it happen. The world has changed, and the industry that once belonged to them? It's barely recognizable. But there's still one thing left to be said. Hollywood isn't the same place Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman helped build. The industry they fought to be part of, the one where talent was the only currency that mattered, is gone. And with Hackman's passing, Eastwood isn't just mourning a friend. He's mourning the end of an era. But there's an unspoken truth no one wants to admit. Hackman didn't just leave Hollywood. He escaped it. Because deep down, he saw what was coming. By the time Hackman retired, the industry was already shifting in ways neither he nor Eastwood could recognize. The movies that made them icons, films that dared to be raw, daring, real, were being pushed aside for something safer, something engineered for mass appeal rather than artistic impact. Audiences were being fed spectacle, not substance, and Hackman wanted no part of it, so he walked away, disappearing into a quiet life of writing, painting, and anonymity. And as the years passed, he watched from the outside as the industry he had once conquered twisted into something unrecognizable. The Hollywood machine didn't stop. It just evolved, leaving behind the actors and filmmakers who refused to play by its new rules. Clint Eastwood stayed, but at what cost? For decades, Eastwood defied time itself, continuing to create films long after most of his peers had faded away. He refused to be erased. He refused to let Hollywood forget what real storytelling looked like. And yet, no matter how many films he made, no matter how many times he proved the world wrong, he could feel it creeping in. The pressure, the push to conform, the slow, suffocating loss of control over an industry he once helped define. And now, as he looks around, he sees it clearer than ever. He is one of the last men standing, the last of his kind. Hackman knew when to step away. He knew that staying too long meant watching everything he loved about the industry be dismantled before his eyes. But Eastwood? He couldn't bring himself to leave. Because for him, this wasn't just a career, it was a war against irrelevance, a war against an industry that no longer values the kind of stories he spent his life telling. And in many ways, he's already lost. The world doesn't make movies like Unforgiven anymore. It doesn't celebrate actors like Hackman or Eastwood the way it once did. The industry is faster now, more disposable. It moves on from legends without hesitation. Hackman saw it coming. He chose to leave on his own terms. But Eastwood? He's still fighting, still trying to hold on to something that may already be gone. And that's the real tragedy. Not that Gene Hackman is gone, but that Hollywood killed everything he stood for long before he ever took his last breath. Eastwood doesn't say it out loud. He doesn't have to, because the look in his eyes says it all. And now, there's only one question left. How long before the last legend finally lets go? Or will Clint Eastwood go down fighting, refusing to surrender even when there's nothing left to save? Either way, the truth is unavoidable. An era has ended, and Hollywood will never be the same again.